Welcome back to our chat. My friend, so glad to have you here again. Grab a coffee and get comfortable, because today we're diving into something that could genuinely change the way you think about money, work, and happiness for the rest of your life. Have you ever looked at someone who seems to have it all figured out, the money, the freedom, the calm, and thought, what does he know that I don't? Not what did he inherit, not who did he know, but what does he actually understand about how the world works that I've never been taught? That question sat with a broke, self-taught immigrant kid from Queens for 30 years, and by the time he was done answering it, he'd built companies, made a fortune as an early investor in things like Twitter and Uber, and then walked away from caring about any of it because he'd figured out something most wealthy people never do. He figured out how to be happy. Today we're going deep into the mind of Naval Ravikant through the book that collected a decade of his thinking into one place, the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. This isn't a book you read once and shelve. It's a book people keep by their bed, the way you'd keep a mirror. You're going to understand exactly why. Here's where most people get it wrong from the very start. They think wealth means money. It doesn't. Money is just a transfer mechanism, a set of social credits an IOU society hands you for the value you created yesterday. You can have a huge pile of money and still not be wealthy, the same way you can be rich in dollars and poor in freedom. Real wealth is something else entirely. Wealth is the asset that keeps earning while you're asleep. It's the factory still running at 3 a.m. It's the code executing on a server while you're dreaming. It's the book still selling copies years after you stopped writing it. If your income requires you to be personally, physically present to generate it, you are not building wealth. You are renting out your time, 1 hour at a time. And there are only so many hours in a life. And here's the part that stings a little. Most of us were never taught this. We were taught to trade hours for dollars. Go to school, get a degree, get a job, work 40 years, retire. That system made sense in a factory economy. It makes a lot less sense now, because there's a third thing sitting quietly next to wealth and money. And it's the one that quietly runs most people's lives without them noticing status. Status is your rank in the tribe. It's ancient. It's the pecking order that existed long before money did. And it is a zero-sum game. For you to move up, someone else has to move down. Wealth creation, by contrast, is positive sum. When you build something valuable, the pie gets bigger for everyone. And here's the uncomfortable truth Naval points to. A lot of the people loudest about how evil money is, how gross it is to want to build wealth, they're not rejecting the game. They're playing a different one. They're playing status. And you have to learn to tell the difference. Because if any part of you secretly resents wealthy people, wealth will always slip through your fingers. People can feel that resentment. It leaks out in every negotiation, every partnership, every deal. So if wealth isn't renting your time, how do you actually build it? It comes down to three things: working together, specific knowledge, accountability, and leverage. Let's take them one at a time, because this is where the whole framework clicks into place. Specific knowledge is the one people misunderstand the most. It is not your degree. It's not a certification. It's not something a school can hand you, because if a school can train it into you, it can train it into 1,000 other people too. And the moment something can be taught at scale, it can be automated or outsourced, and the price for it collapses. Specific knowledge is different. It's the stuff you were doing as a kid or a teenager, almost without trying, the thing that felt like play to you, but looked like work to everyone watching. Maybe it was an obsessive need to take things apart and understand how they work. Maybe it was an ability to read a room and know exactly what to say to close a sale. Maybe it was disappearing into books for hours while other kids were outside. Whatever it was, that thing you did naturally, the thing your mother or your best friend noticed before you ever did, that's the seed. It's baked into your specific wiring, your specific childhood, your specific weird combination of curiosities. And here's the beautiful part. Nobody can compete with you on being you. Somebody can outwork you. Somebody can outspend you, but nobody can out-you. The moment you build your career, your content, your business around what's authentically yours, you stop competing, because competition only exists when you're copying somebody else. Then comes accountability. This one's uncomfortable, because accountability means putting your name on something and accepting that if it fails, the failure is yours, publicly, with your name attached. Most people avoid this instinctively. We're wired to. For most of human history, failing publicly under your own name could get you shamed, exiled, or worse. But here's what almost nobody tells you. In the modern world, the actual downside of failure is much smaller than your nervous system thinks it is. You're not going to prison. You're not going to be executed. In most cases, the worst outcome is embarrassment and a bit of a reset. And on the other side of that risk is the only path to real leverage, because leverage has to be given to you by someone, and nobody hands leverage to a person who won't put their name on the outcome. Which brings us to leverage itself, probably the single most important concept in the entire book, because leverage is the multiplier. It's the difference between someone who works incredibly hard for 30 years and ends up with very little, and someone who works moderately hard but multiplies their effort 1,000 times over. There are 4 forms of leverage, and understanding the difference between them will change how you think about your entire career. The first is labor, other people working for you. It's the oldest form of leverage there is, and it's also the messiest. Managing people is hard. It requires real leadership, and someone else always has to agree to follow you, which means this form of leverage isn't fully yours. It's permission. The second is capital money. It's a powerful multiplier, but again, somebody has to hand it to you, whether that's an investor, a bank, or a business partner. It's also permission. But then there's a third and fourth category that changed everything about how fortunes get made in the modern world: code and media. Products with no marginal cost of replication. A piece of software doesn't get tired. A podcast episode doesn't need to be re-recorded for the millionth listener. A book doesn't need you to personally read it aloud to every new reader. This is permissionless leverage. You don't need anyone's approval to write, to code, to record, to publish. All you need is a laptop and the will to start. This is exactly why the newest generation of enormous fortunes wasn't built by bankers moving other people's money around. It was built by people who wrote code or made media that scaled to millions without asking permission from a single gatekeeper. And here's the piece that ties it together. Leverage is a multiplier for your judgment. If your judgment is good and your leverage is high, you create enormous value. If your judgment is bad and your leverage is high, you can do enormous damage to yourself or to others. So the real question becomes, how do you build good judgment? And that question takes us into the second major part of this book, because Naval didn't just build wealth, he built a mind capable of seeing clearly, and that might be the more valuable skill of the two. Clear thinking starts with a strange, almost backwards idea. The smartest people you'll ever meet are not the ones who use the most complicated language. They're the ones who can explain the most complicated things using the simplest words. If someone can't explain their idea to a child, they probably don't fully understand it themselves. Real understanding is built from the ground up, brick by brick, not memorized in disconnected chunks. And the thing that clouds this kind of clear thinking more than anything else isn't a lack of intelligence, it's ego, it's desire. The moment you want a particular outcome badly enough, your ability to see reality clearly starts to bend around that want. You've felt this before. Think about giving advice to a friend going through a breakup or a failing business. From the outside, the truth is obvious. You can see it in seconds, but your friend can't see it because they're standing inside the wanting. They're wishing reality were different, and that wish is exactly what's blocking their view. The same thing happens to you every single day in your own decision, and the only real defense against it is radical honesty with other people, but especially with yourself. The moment you start lying to protect your own feelings, you lose your compass. You start believing your own excuses, and once that happens, every decision after it drifts a little further from reality. This is also where identity becomes dangerous. We build our sense of self in our first 2 decades of life, shaped by parents, by culture, by whatever tribe we happen to be born into, and then we spend the rest of our lives defending that identity instead of updating it. Any belief you absorbed as part of a package, a political label, a religious label, a national label, deserves to be pulled apart and re-examined from scratch, because packaged beliefs are rarely examined individually. They just come as a bundle, and you defend the whole bundle out of loyalty to an identity, not because you've actually thought each piece through. The people who make the clearest decisions are the ones who hold their identity loosely enough to change their mind the moment new evidence shows up. And when it comes to actually making a hard decision, Naval offers one of the simplest, sharpest tools in the entire book. If you can't decide, the answer is no. Think about why this works. We live in a world with an almost infinite number of options, infinite careers, infinite cities, infinite potential partners, but our brains evolved in tribes of maybe 150 people where choices were scarce and obvious. When you're staring at a decision and you find yourself building a spreadsheet of pros and cons that still won't resolve, that hesitation is data. It's telling you that if this were truly right for you, you wouldn't need convincing. And on the flip side, here's a strange companion rule for decisions that are genuinely a coin flip between two roughly equal paths. Take the one that's harder in the short term. Your brain is wired to avoid short-term pain and chase short-term comfort, but almost everything valuable in life sits on the other side of some discomfort you're currently avoiding. If two paths are truly balanced and one of them just feels more uncomfortable right now, that discomfort is very often pointing you toward the path with the better long-term payoff. Now let's talk about the part of this book that might matter more than any of it, because you can build all the wealth in the world and all the clear judgment in the world and still wake up one day feeling completely empty. Naval says something that should stop you in your tracks. 10 years before he found real peace, if you'd asked him how happy he was on a scale of 1 to 10, he would have said 2 or 3, maybe 4 on a great day. And he had already made money by that point. Money was there. Happiness wasn't. That gap is the whole reason this part of the book exists. Here's the reframe that changes everything. Happiness isn't a feeling feeling you stumble into. It's a skill, like fitness, like nutrition, like learning a language, something you build deliberately over years through repeated practice. And the biggest trap most of us fall into, without even realizing it, is believing some external thing is finally going to make us happy. The new job, the new relationship, the new car. We chase it, we get it, and within days, sometimes hours, the craving quietly shifts to the next thing on the list. This isn't a personal failure. It's how desire works. Every single desire you hold is, in a very real sense, a contract you've signed with yourself to be unhappy until you get what you want. Which means the fewer desires you're carrying around at any given moment, the more peace you actually have access to right now, today, without waiting for anything external to change. This is why success alone never delivers the happiness people expect from it. Naval watched people around him, genuinely accomplished, genuinely wealthy people, reach the milestones they'd spent decades chasing, and he noticed something unsettling. They weren't happy. They'd simply adapted to their new normal within weeks and were already reaching for the next milestone. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, and it is relentless. It's the treadmill that keeps moving no matter how fast you run. The way off of it isn't running faster. It's stepping off entirely. And that only happens when you stop measuring your life by an external scoreboard. Because here's the truth most people never sit with. Life, underneath all the noise, is a single-player game. You are born alone. You experience everything alone, inside your own head, and you'll leave alone. The version of you that's constantly comparing itself to other people is playing a multiplayer status game it was never designed to win, because there's always going to be someone with more. Envy deserves a special mention here, because it might be the single most corrosive emotion in this entire framework. Naval describes a moment of real clarity around his own jealousy, realizing that when he envied someone, he wasn't actually envying one slice of their life, like their money or their looks. To truly have what they have, he'd have to become them entirely, their family, their fears, their relationships, their whole internal experience, all of it as a complete package. And once you frame envy that way, it usually dissolves on its own, because most of us, if we're honest, wouldn't actually trade our whole life for someone else's. We just want the highlight reel without the rest of the story. So how do you actually build the skill of happiness day to day? It comes down to habits, the same unglamorous way you'd build any other skill. Naval names a few blunt practicals: cutting out the substances and behaviors that spike your mood artificially and then crash it. Sugar, alcohol, endless scrolling because your baseline mood stability matters more than any single high. Choosing the people around you with real intention, because you become an average of who you spend your time with, and misery is contagious in exactly the same way calm is. Getting sunlight, moving your body every single day, because peace of mind is so much easier to access when you already have peace in your body. And building a daily practice of acceptance, recognizing that in any difficult situation, you only ever have three real options. You can change it, you can accept it, you can leave it. What destroys people isn't the situation itself. It's getting stuck in the gap between those three options, wishing you'd change something you're not actually changing, refusing to accept it, and refusing to leave. That stuck place, that refusal to choose, is where most human suffering actually lives. And underneath all of this sits meditation, not as some mystical practice, but as a very practical tool for watching your own mind in action. Naval describes the mind, before you've trained it, as something like a monkey flinging things around a room, completely out of control, and most of us never even notice because we're so identified with our thoughts that we think we are the chaos. The moment you sit quiet and simply observe your thinking without judging it, you create a tiny gap between yourself and the noise, and in that gap is where real freedom starts. You start to notice that something like 90% of your anxious thoughts are fear dressed up as planning, and the moment you actually see a fear clearly, without flinching from it, it tends to lose its grip almost immediately. There's one more piece worth sitting with before we close this out, and it might be the most grounding idea in the entire book, Mortality. Naval doesn't dance around it. He says plainly that almost everything humans chase, legacy, achievement, being remembered, is really just a disguised attempt to avoid facing the fact that we're going to die and it's going to be over. And instead of running from that fact, he suggests turning directly toward it, because death is what makes the present moment valuable in the first place. If you had unlimited time, nothing would be urgent, nothing would be precious. It's the shortness that gives any of it weight. Your entire life is, in the truest sense, a single blink of light in an almost incomprehensibly long night. And once you actually let that that sink in. Instead of it being terrifying, it becomes strangely liberating. All the status battle, all the little grudges, all the anxious spirals about what other people think of you, they shrink down to their actual size, which is very small, against the scale of 10 billion years behind us and 10 billion more ahead. So where does that leave you watching this right now? It leaves you with a fairly simple but demanding invitation. Stop chasing money and start building specific knowledge, the thing that's authentically, uncopyably yours. Stop renting out your hours and start reaching for leverage that doesn't need anyone's permission. Take on real accountability. Put your name on something and accept that the risk is smaller than your fear is telling you it is. Build your judgment the way you'd build a muscle, through honesty with yourself, through questioning the beliefs you inherited instead of chose, through leaning into the harder path when two options are genuinely close. And underneath all of, remember that none of the wealth, none of the leverage, none of the achievement means anything if you never learn the actual skill sitting quietly at the center of this entire book, the skill of being at peace with exactly where you are, right now, with nothing missing. That's the whole almanac, distilled down to what actually matters. Not a set of tricks to get rich, a blueprint for building a life you don't need to escape from. If this hit you the way it hit me, putting it together, do me a favor and stick around, because the next book on this channel goes even deeper into the psychology of why we chase the things we chase, and I think you're going to want to see it. I'll see you in the next one.